I'm afraid I do. I was against it at the time, and I've made that view clear when I was recently in office. There are some difficulties which I appreciate. That said, I'm also very conscious that soldiers who've been wounded psychologically are far better off one with the other in the same ward under a military environment. That's their life, that's what they respond to. This is not easy to achieve under the present arrangements.
But if senior soldiers like you opposed this decision, who overruled you?
Clearly, the whole central decision-making apparatus of the Ministry of Defence took the view that the military hospitals had to go at the end of the Cold War.
And it was a mistake?
In my belief, it was, yes.
But it was a wasteful system, wasn't it? You had doctors waiting around, underemployed.
There is a strong clinical opinion that the population base simply isn't large enough to warrant the full panoply. But I would have thought between the two extremes, no hospitals at all and the full panoply, one ought to be, it shouldn't be beyond the wit of man to devise a set of arrangements whereby, so far as is possible, not only wounded soldiers, but soldiers who become ill in the normal course of events can be given medical attention within the military environment.
Do you think at the time the decision was taken there was a serious underestimation of possible future casualty levels?
Well, that may be hindsight. I think at the end of the Cold War, there wasn't the sense then, we're talking about the very early 90s, that the next decade and a half or so was going to see British armed forces committed to the extent that they have been. So one might conclude that now, but I would not wish to use that as an argument against the decision at the time. It was more a decision, I think, or my objection is one more of principle than of numbers.
But clearly, with British troops taking casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan, you wouldn't make the same decision now, would you?
I would hope not. I would hope not. I think, without doubt, the nation owes a complete duty of care to soldiers who are wounded in the course of operations on behalf of the country. And they deserve the very best arrangements, both clinical and otherwise, that we can give them.
Would you argue in favour of re-establishing the military hospitals now?
I would. I'm well aware that there are counter-arguments. I think I've covered the clinical area. I'm not your best evidence there, as I've said. And no doubt there are also budgetary arguments against it as well.
But the last one's due to close in a couple of months' time, isn't it?
Yes, so I believe. It's at Haslar, near Portsmouth.
Do you think the government should change that policy or decision?
Well, I would be very encouraged if the Ministry of Defence re-looked at this whole question of medical care for servicemen after being wounded, and indeed, as I said a moment ago, who need hospitalisation in the normal course of events. The armed forces ought to be able, in my view, to create the conditions in which, to a greater extent certainly than now, soldiers under those circumstances are treated and are rehabilitated within the military environment with which they are familiar and from which they draw their own psychological support.
Do you think, though, that soldiers are still let down?
Well, I think that's slightly emotive language and perhaps overstating it a little. But at the risk of repeating myself, I do believe that we ought to make a better effort to give the soldiers who are wounded in the course of their duty military care and rehabilitation within the military environment, if at all clinically possible.
Well, we're joined now by Derek Twigg from Liverpool. He's the Veterans Minister. Mr. Twigg, are you prepared to reconsider this decision and perhaps reopen some military hospitals?
It's very clear from the advice and evidence we've seen is that There just isn't the population now to justify military hospitals to ensure that our clinicians and nurses get the experience and training and also development that they need to maintain the skills that are needed today to treat and care for our injured soldiers and service people.
So the answer is no?
No, we've no plans to do that. What's clear is we've got a very good working partnership now with the NHS, and you mentioned Celio before, where we've got military managers now at every level and an increasing number of military nurses, and I've visited Celio on a number of occasions and clearly seen how well it's working in terms of the treatment that our soldiers and service personnel are getting.
How many military beds are there in Celio?
Can I just say I've talked to both the soldiers and their families, and it's clear they talk very, very highly of what the treatment they're getting there and the care they're getting there.
How many military beds are there in Celio, please?
Well, currently we have 2 bays, 2 units. Normally there would not be a need for more than roughly about 2 units or 2 cubicles there, sorry, 2 bays there.
So how many beds is
soldiers. So we are planning, as I say, to now increase the number of nurses further, and as I've said, we've got military managers now at every level.
How many beds is it, please, Minister?
Well, it varies because what happens if the beds are not being used by soldiers, they can be used by civilians.
How many beds are currently set aside for the military, please?
Well, when I last visited there before Christmas, there was somewhere between 8 and 9 soldiers that I visited, but there were more than that in different parts of the hospital, because one of the things about it is that clearly where we can, we want to treat the injured service personnel together. But that's not always possible because of obviously different injuries, for instance, burns or neurological. So that's not always possible. That certainly is our intent where it is possible and medically and clinically feasible to do so.
Minister, you heard servicemen who've been seriously injured there talking about their experiences. You're surely not going to pretend that it is all working according to plan. You heard them say there that when they arrived, they found that, quite rightly and understandably perhaps, decisions about priorities were made on the basis of clinical need by clinicians, and that necessarily meant they did not get the sort of attention they felt they had received previously or would have received previously in dedicated military units. You accept that?
Now, I'm very clear now that in the operational theatre and also at places like Selly our service personnel are getting world-class and top quality treatment.
Clearly there are some who feel they're not.
I've spoken personally to the soldiers and to their families.
What, all of them?
It's very clear to me. Now, having said that, let me just say this. Clearly, I'm disappointed and disturbed to hear some of the stories that you've described tonight. I'm very clear that the type of treatment, the type of care that people are getting now is of top quality. I'm clearly willing to look into any cases where people feel they didn't get that quality of care at any time.
Minister, there are many examples. We can point you at them. We can show you the notice boards. We can put you in touch with the people. And you heard yourself there, the former head of the Army, General Sir Mike Jackson, saying he didn't think the present arrangements were satisfactory.
Well, I'll make it clear again. I've been to Selly Oak, I've been to Headley Court. I've seen for myself, I've spoken to both the soldiers, the families, both military and civilian staff working in the hospital. There is a top-class care being given now to our soldiers and servicemen for what the treatment they have in the hospital.
Minister,
and in the care generally. Can I also say
did you anticipate the level of demand there would be?
Well, the level of demand is something that we're coping with and dealing with. That's the point I've been trying to make to you during the interview, is I've been there.
Well, Sir Mike Jackson said you hadn't anticipated it.
No, the point made about military hospitals is I fundamentally disagree with. But it's not the population to justify having military hospitals, because we cannot guarantee the training and development there for our clinicians and nurses to ensure the best possible quality treatment for our service personnel.
Minister, is it acceptable for an injured serviceman to have to be treated in a civilian hospital like this and to be told that he shouldn't wear his uniform for fear it might offend fellow patients, and to have, while in a hospital bed, to defend the war that he's had to fight in Iraq? Is that acceptable or not?
Well, where there are serving personnel, though clearly we have our military medical facilities of which we use to treat them. But it's always been the case since 1948 that those who have left the military service are treated by the NHS.
Minister, my example, is it acceptable or not?
It's not acceptable for anyone not to have the best treatment, but I'm very clear is that the treatment we're now providing for our military personnel is world-class treatment. Right. And those that have left the service and are treated and cared for by the NHS, again, get top-quality care.
Right, Minister, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.